name's Adam Hanlon. I'm the editor of Wetpixel. I'd like to welcome you all to Wetpixel Live. I'd like to thank Chris's at Lembe Resort, very much sponsoring this episode. They run an operation in the Lembe Straits, arguably one of the best muck diving areas in the planet. So please head on over to lemberesort.com to have a look and see what they get up to. I'd like to welcome our regular contributor, Alex Mustard. Hi, Alex.
Hey, Adam. Nice to be here.
Nice to see you. And I thought today we would talk about housing accessories, and I was going to ask Alex what accessories can he mount on his housing, and what accessories should he mount on his housing. Over to you, Alex.
Oh, thanks. Well, I guess I'd start by saying that, underwater photographers, and it's pretty true of any hobbyist of any hobby, do enjoy a good toy. And so anything that can add to things is always nice. Yeah. I think there's lots of things that, you can add to housings. Something, depending on the housing you buy and how much you spend when you buy it. Some of these things may already be included. And I would say in the broad spectrum of housings that are available, from everything from tiny GoPro housings up all the way to big fancy SLR and mirrorless housings, there's obviously a great scope. So it's hard to say, it's impossible to think of things that can be added to all housings. And at the same time, but there are things that to some housings are really, really valuable to add. So it's a list that not everything is applicable to everyone. Sure. But I've got some good suggestions. Yeah. I would say the first thing to think about is how is the mounting points for your flash guns and your strobes onto your housing, and where these are positioned. Now, most housings come with some sort of mounting point there, but you might want to think about options for them. Sure. I personally don't like to mount my strobes from my housing's handles. Sure. And there are two reasons that I don't like to do it that way. The first is that sometimes I might want to remove the handle of my housing, particularly the left-hand handle, because it can allow you to get the camera lower. It can allow you to get strobes in tighter, and both those things are very nice to use. But also, actually, if you want to pull your strobe arms down and they're on the handle, they end up clamping your hand and grabbing your hand, and your hand is in the way. Whereas if they're mounted from on top of the housing, you can get those strobe arms down without them clamping your hand. So you don't get that clamping problem as well. So generally, I would look for strobe mounting points away from those areas. So, I think. Sorry, I was.
So the other thing I think I was going to mention about strobe mounts is, and this is somewhat. But when I take my handle off and turn my strobe, so I'm now shooting verticals, I tend to actually mount a ball mount into the tripod hole on the housing. So possibly something else to look for when we're considering mounting accessories on our housings. Make sure it's got a tripod hole, and make sure what size it is. I don't know if there's
normally that 1/4 inch. So.
But sometimes housings are not. So obviously, again, you can find balls to adapt it. It's not a problem, but make sure you get the right size. I've made that mistake and got the wrong size in the past.
Personally, I would look for a housing that doesn't just have a central ball position for a strobe. Mm-hmm. And actually, most housings actually have a central place, and then maybe a couple of other just threads in the bottom of the housing. And particularly the one on the upper side is more useful for mounting a strobe ball into. And that's a useful thing to have. There's always a bit of a debate about whether you want those sort of quick release shoe type strobe balls, or whether you want ones that are permanently bolted to the housing. Yep. I think it depends a little bit on what the sort of photography you do. I would say if you do a lot of available light photography, big animal photography, you probably don't want a housing with balls permanently on the top of it. Yep. Because it just makes it bigger, more drag. You might as well be able to trim it down. And also, if you're getting those opportunities, the ability to quickly take your strobe arms off is really great. Yep. I think the downside of the quick release mounting plates for the housings is that those sort of T-plates is that there is a potential there that when carrying the housing, one of those can come off. Yep. And the housing can go crash on the floor and damage itself. And I have to say, I'm also don't like those strobe arms that have got that quick release in the strobe arm, so you can take your strobe arm off. There's already T-plates if you're really into it. There's much more of a need to completely take the strobe arms off than just take the last bit of it off with a quick release strobe arm. So if you do want to do a lot of sort of available light shooting, you see dolphins a lot on the way back from dives or whatever it is, then having, the quick release T-plate makes much more sense than having a quick release arm, which I don't really see the value in. over a T-plate, because why would you ever want to take off just the last bit?
One of the things about the T-plates as well is they do work themselves loose as well. So, quite often they're another source of movement in the whole strobe arm system. So they are something you need to check and make sure they're tight. It's important to stress that you can generally buy adapters. So if your housing comes with a fixed ball, you can normally get a T-plate adapter that will fit onto it, and vice versa. So, if you've got a T-plate adapter, you can normally find a ball that will mount into the position where the T-plate. So these are things that you can change to suit different purposes, or if you decide to try a different way of doing it. So you're not set in stone with them.
Yeah. And then the other thing we regularly want to mount onto our housing is a focus light. So it's good to have a third mounting point on the housing for a focus light. And that is one of the reasons why I quite like those housings that do have balls on top of the housing for the strobes and then balls on the handles. It means that you can use those maybe for some of these other accessories. But personally, for me, I prefer to have the focus light mounted centrally. And therefore, the best place for that is kind of in a cold shoe position directly above the viewfinder, as a place where you can mount a mounting ball. The other place you can put in a really nice place to mount a strobe light is actually on a mounting ball coming off the port, which I think is also a very good solution. A lot of those have cold shoes on where you can slot a ball in and attach off there. Right. I didn't realize there was so much to say about those. The next thing, something that I think should be standard on all housings, but is usually sold as an accessory, is a handle strap for the housing. If you want to be able to hold a housing without having to grip the handle the whole time, you need a handle strap which goes around the outside. So you have the handle here, and then there's a strap that holds your hand to the handle, so that you can freely move your fingers to do all that important stuff like pressing the shutter, and you don't have to have some of the fingers holding onto the housing all the time, the handle all the time. So a handle strap, I think, should come with every housing.
And they're really, really good for one-handed shooting as well, aren't they? They just keep everything together.
Yeah, and why would you not want to be able to take pictures one-handed? I know we've all got trained with our phones now to take pictures two-handed, but for a long time everyone took pictures one-handed. You don't need to use two hands to take a photo. Now there are times you might want to, but personally I think it's a good thing to have, and that's I think a great accessory for people to think if you're looking to buy something. A lot of the manufacturers have ways, if they don't provide them standard, they already have like mounting grub screws and things so that you can attach them on. Right, then I was going to go on some of the gubbins that goes inside, and there's some sort of safety electronics which are leak detectors and vacuum detectors, which I think are come as standard on a lot of housings now. But if you don't have them, certainly the vacuum detector I would say is the one to go for over the leak detector. Yes, vacuum systems are not 100% infallible, and a leak detector might still save you, but a leak detector doesn't give you really any reassurance. It just gives you a warning, whereas a vacuum system gives you reassurance, so you feel good about things, and then you can get on with things. And if it's not holding, you've got an issue before the dive, whereas a leak detector just tells you have an issue during the dive. So vacuum for me all the time, but both might as well have.
Quite a lot of the manufacturers now will provide, well, there's a variety of approaches to this. Some will incorporate the circuitry as a standard. So some manufacturers will have the circuitry for vacuum sensing the vacuum standard, but you have to buy a bulkhead and a pump in order to produce the vacuum. Alternatively, some manufacturers actually will provide the bulkhead, but you have to buy the pump and all the other associated bits. So there are different approaches to this. Increasingly, they are a fairly standard item. And I guess the other thing it's worth pointing out is you can buy completely separate third-party options as well. That come from another supplier that screw into a spare port on the housing. So there are a number of different options on this. I think the majority of I was going to say more serious, bigger camera housings possibly will have at least a leak detector now. Even some of the compact cameras now have leak detectors. There's less of a market now, I think, for third-party leak detection systems, but there is obviously quite a big market for third-party vacuum systems. And yeah, I mean, I think it's pretty much a standard thing now. I can't imagine going back to a time when we didn't have vacuum. Well, without a vacuum, I'm happy to live without it, but I'd rather not.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Right, and then the other bit of electronics you might want to slung in there or upgrade what you have already is an upgraded flash trigger. Some housings will come with the latest one, But I have to say, there's been quite a lot of progress in the last few years, and it's perhaps been a period of relative stability of cameras. And as a result, there's quite a lot of people around now who've got 3-4-year-old housings, and they're very happy, and they're probably going to carry on using them for quite a while. Whereas I think through most of that was very common in the film era of underwater photography, that people would have cameras and housings for 10 years and didn't see the point in upgrading really just to have a little bit better specs. And then throughout the digital era, people have been, regularly changing housings every couple of years, if not, maybe slightly longer. So I think that's been a real change. I think we're now in a period where people are like, you know what, the camera I've got is damn good. I don't really feel I need to jump on the bandwagon of every new housing. But so as a result, there is more of this need to maybe upgrade stuff. And one of the things I would encourage people to think about upgrading is some of that circuitry to give you, I know people like Pavel who make the Underwater Technics boards. They've put a lot of emphasis into upgrading their systems, particularly allowing newer features like high-speed sync that we've talked about Wetpixel Live, better TTL protocols, better LEDs, and things to work more effectively with some of the newer strobes that have caused issues with flash syncing. So it's quite an interesting area to spend money on, and they're quite expensive, but they can really give you an upgrade of quality. And I've actually upgraded my flash trigger last year in my D850 housing to one of the newer Underwater Technics boards, and I've been really, it was 2 grub screws, like a 2-minute job, and I've been super happy with how it's performed. That's a really nice thing to upgrade in the housing.
And I think you can also get, there's all sorts of options now in that you can get. I have a combination of my older strobes were electrically synced, my newer strobes are optically synced, and I actually have a board that Pavo built for me that will do either. So I now have the option of, so it allows me to use both sets of strobes given housings, and there's all sorts of combinations now that make it very versatile.
Yeah, his standard board does that. I mean, the standard board I have, it allows you to do both. It's got electronic cord cables and fiber. There's a couple of other smaller accessories at the cheaper end of things. Not just, I'm not going to, get some nice new O-ring grease and give your housing a treat. But there's a couple of things you might want to stick inside your housing. And the first is if you have a polycarbonate housing, particularly one of the small ones around a compact camera, silica gel is really worth investing money in. The polycarbonate housings tend to dissipate the heat less well than a metal housing. And the smaller compact cameras running an onboard pop-up flash tend to create a lot of heat. And those smaller plastic camera bodies also get very hot and have much more condensation issues than big metal cameras inside bigger metal housings, which haven't got pop-up flashes. So silica gel is really good for that. And there are also some specialist products. I remember reviewing one a long time ago on Wetpixel called Leak Insure, which is basically both a combination of silica gel and super absorbent crystals, and they come in little, sachets like silica gel, and you could just, secure them inside your housing. And then if you do have a leak, they're very, very absorbent, absorbing that leak. You can obviously use feminine hygiene products. I'm not quite sure what the correct way to call them.
As well put,
tampons and that sort of thing inside your housing. And those are absorbent, but these sort of, chemical crystal solutions are far more absorbent. So with taking up less space inside your housing, you have more water absorbing properties. I did find with mine that because of the humidity in a lot of the places we dive, over time they would begin to swell up, and they probably needed changing relatively frequently. They don't swell up obviously as much as if water came in, but they're one of those things that probably every year or two you should probably buy a new set and just change them over inside the housing, and they just kind of sit there out of sight. But that one day you get water in, you're damn glad you've got them there, and then you get you can change one with one of the rest that are in the tub you've got.
Sorry. So something else I was going to mention about a relatively simple option, but something you should consider is a means, if you plan to use a lanyard with your housing, consider how you're going to attach it. Now, some people attach them to strobe bombs, some people attach them to housings. There's lots of options here, but, again, there's lots of different ways, but have a look at your housing, see where the attachment points are, see where the holes are, where you can tie stuff to it, figure out how you're going to do it, and obviously the appropriate lanyard, whatever lanyard you plan to use with it. Just one of those standard sort of accessories really that you want to consider.
Yeah, and I think a lot of people quite like having 2 lanyards as well. We talked about this specifically before, but having one that attaches you to the housing,
Yeah.
and one that's a carry handle.
Yeah.
I know you and I both dive with just carry handles,
Yeah.
but quite a lot of people like those ones that attach them. And with all the money that these things cost, they're really good. Adam's showing off the new one by Seacam there, but there's lots of good ones on the market.
Which actually, to be fair, attaches to the arms. It's not strictly relevant to housings, but yeah, I mean, same idea. Yeah.
The next one, which is probably the biggest expense in terms of accessory to buy for your housing, is a viewfinder.
Yep.
And I know there's we could definitely talk a whole episode or two on viewfinders, but I think they're an area where if you're looking to pimp your housing, I guess you're going to call this episode, Adam, aren't you? If you are looking to pimp your housing, then those can really transform your whole way of shooting.
Yeah.
Both Adam and we both shoot with 45-degree viewfinders. Yeah. I think particularly with SLR style cameras, they have significant advantages in lots of areas underwater. They do take a little bit longer to get used to using, but beyond that, they work really reliably, and I think they're much more comfortable to shoot with, allow you to get the camera lower, encourage you to shoot better shooting angles without having to contort your body as much from a more typical horizontal diving position. If you're diving horizontally, and some of the best advice in underwater photography is to shoot slightly upwards, it doesn't take very long to realize that it's not the most comfortable position to shoot slightly upwards while lying on your belly. And therefore the 45-degree viewfinder makes that possible, particularly if you dive, with your neck constricted by thick hoods, thick dry suit seals, that sort of thing. But in all conditions, it's very comfortable.
I think it's also, when you've used 45 and you get used to using a 45, it's hard to switch between viewfinders. So it becomes something that you use all the time, just because it's hard to switch. I mean, I have a straight viewfinder, but I very rarely use it.
Yeah, I've never bought one. So yeah, and I also say that those big views that those expensive viewfinders give I find them very inspiring as a photographer. When you see this big view, it really makes you want to create a really beautiful frame. And I think that they can, so they're not just about making life easier for you. They can actually encourage you to push yourself further as a photographer and create, really special images.
It's worth mentioning as well, and this is somewhat in the realm of the esoteric, but if you have specific needs, so remote triggering, or HDMI out, or all these other things, these are all things that can be incorporated in most housings now. They vary in terms of compatibility, but generally those bulkheads that you've got on your housing will allow you to route stuff in and out. And the trick here is, if you've got some esoteric need that you want to, a surface SDI video for somewhere at the surface, it can be done. I mean, obviously there's a cost involved, but it can be done. So they're incredibly versatile. You can build a whole system around a fairly standard housing to accommodate all sorts of different things.
I think the things to watch are that not all housings have a lot of space around where the plugs go into the side of the camera. Yeah. I think particularly with the rise of video monitors, the housing manufacturers have been more careful to give more space there. But what you often need to buy is a plug that's actually been adapted to have a 90-degree bend on it so that it can fit in the narrow space in the housing, which then connects up to a socket. And the sockets that are on most housings are all based around the same filter, the same thread. So you could, for example, I use a Subal housing, but I use a Nauticam vacuum valve on it. And, I don't need to buy a Nauticam vacuum valve to Subal adapter. They both use the same thread. So you just screw it in with your fingers and tighten it up. So it's, those things are widespread across the industry. So you can change those things. I would mention though that Reptra they make a a remote release that actually doesn't need any holes in the housing. It's actually held on by a magnet. It's called the U trigger, and it sends a pulse through the housing, and then it allows it. It's held on with a small mechanical joint, and and then it sends a pulse through the housing, which triggers the camera. And that's something that I always mean to experiment more with and never use enough.
How far away from the camera can you be with it?
I think it's about a 3 or 5 meter cable. Right. You certainly don't want to be further away than that from anything underwater, but certainly with a wide angle, that really makes a difference. Yeah. And I keep meaning, it works best with a tripod. But there's a couple of ideas that I've always had for it. And one is to dive much more with my tripod and use it much more, particularly, with some of the shyer creatures and things like that. And I really regret that I don't do that enough. Every trip I'm always like, I should have spent a few dives trying to get something really different, really special. And then I've always had this idea of wanting to do underwater pole camming, where you go on a manta dive and you purposely put your camera on a 2 meter pole, and then you go diving with it, and you have a remote release at the end of the pole, and you're able to get really close up shots while the animals are nice and relaxed because the divers aren't in their faces. You're just holding the camera above your head, really. But I've never tried that, but I'd always want to.
Well, there we are. There's an accessory that everyone should have, an underwater pole cam. There we are. I can see the manufacturers selling thousands on the back of that, Alex. Wonderful. So thank you very much, Alex. And it's been very pleasant as always. And I'd like to thank our sponsor again, which is Lembe Resort. Please, if you're planning a trip to Lembe, go and check out what they do. I'd like to thank you all for watching. Please feel free to drop us any comments about your crucial housing accessories and to add a like if you enjoyed it. Thank you very much. I look forward to seeing you again soon.